technologically savvy.
That was from the thing on skipping.
Well, how is everybody?
We're good.
How are you?
Very well, very well. So what's everybody studying?
I'm studying psychology and biology.
I'm studying psychology and history.
Okay.
I'm studying earth and environmental science.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm studying bio on a pre-dental track.
Only an earth science major.
Very cool. Well, so you'll see this in a second. My background is in psych and marine science. So I'm very sorry to my psych people. You will probably know all of the information that I'm going to share, but it's okay. It'll be a refresher. Can you guys see that?
We can see it.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So I was just going to talk about behavioral basics, but my name is Alexa Freed. I'm graduating from the University of Tampa in a few weeks, and I'm getting my Bachelor of Science in Psychology, and I also have a marine science minor, so I did a lot of zoology, ecology, and evolutionary courses. And all of my work has been in animal care and with animal behavior. And then I have a little experience in conservation education, so if anybody has questions about specifics of the things I've done, advice as to how to get into animal care, conservation education, things like that, do let me know. 1 second, let me get my speaker notes. But yeah, I'm going to talk about behavioral basics. They're more catered to the zoo world because, if I'm not mistaken, this is the Marine Biology Club, right?
Yes.
So I figured people would probably be more interested in the animal side of psychology. So behavior is any action that can be described, observed, recorded. And there's two ways to develop. There's hereditary factors, like I have this picture of a fiddler crab. I tried to be, marine science-y. They have to do a mating dance, and they have to do it very perfectly in order to have a successful mate. That is all hereditary. There's not really any learning to that, but we learn to associate the smell of coffee with the sensation of coffee, for example. And then behavior modification is changing the antecedents and consequences of a behavior in order to change it. An antecedent is a stimuli that happens before a behavior occurs, and a consequence is anything that follows a behavior. And now I'm going to go into more specifics on behavior. So there's two types of conditioning. There's classical and operant. Classical is the one that everybody thinks of, like Pavlov's dog. But it's just learning a process, learning to associate a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. And an example of this in the zoo world is clickers. So operant conditioning is used more in the zoo world. So really one of the only examples that I can think of classical is before you feed an animal, you'll click your clicker a few times, and they'll learn to associate that noise with, oh, food is coming. And then operant conditioning is the one that's more so used with animals, and that's learning through consequences, so reinforcement and punishment. And punishment tends to have a negative connotation, understandably, but in terms of psychology, it has a very different meaning, so I will also get into that. Okay, so reinforcement, anything that increases the amount of behavior is a reinforcement. There's a couple of kinds. There's primary and secondary. So a primary reinforcement is anything that's innate. So for us, food is a primary reinforcer. So the same thing with animals. When you're reinforcing them with food, a behavior is more likely to occur. And a secondary reinforcement is something that's learned. So for us, that would be like money. We learn to do a behavior like go to work because we get money at the end of it. And then there's positive and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is the behavior occurs and it's followed by the presentation of a stimulus. And it's going to be a positive stimulus like food or a treat. And then negative reinforcement is a behavior is followed by the removal of a stimulus. It's usually an aversive stimulus. So an example of a negative reinforcement would be buckling your seatbelt so that your car stops dinging. It's taking away that annoying sound, and it's going to increase the behavior in the future. Then there's punishment, which again has a really negative connotation, but it's just a consequence that decreases the amount of behavior. Again, there's positive and negative. So an example of positive punishment would be, this is the best zoological example I have. Sometimes zookeepers will hand rear big cats, like tigers, which is why I have a picture of a tiger, and then they become a little too comfortable with the zookeepers. They get a little too big, and they're still jumping and cuddling with the zookeepers, but it's a little painful. Picture a tiger's claws. Obviously, you're not going to do anything harmful to the tiger, but an instance I heard from another zookeeper was that they sprayed vinegar in the air near the tiger, so they learned to associate jumping on the keeper with that smell, and the behavior went away. So that was adding an aversive stimulus. And then negative punishment would be removing a rewarding stimulus. So an example would be taking away someone's video games or taking away their Xbox for negative behavior. And then there's multiple reinforcement schedules. There's continuous, which is every time a behavior occurs, you deliver reinforcement. So if I ask a dog to sit, every time it sits, it gets a treat. And then there's 4 intermittent schedules, and these are more likely to get a behavior to last. So there's fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. Fixed ratio is before you do the training, you set a predetermined number like 3, and after the animal, or you could even apply this to people, after the person does the behavior 3 times, then you reward them. Then there's variable ratio, which is you literally, after a few numbers of a behavior, you reward. It's very informal. Then there's fixed interval, so after 3 minutes, you reward a behavior as long as it's been occurring for those 3 minutes. And then variable interval, where after an unspecified amount of time, you reward a behavior. So don't worry, I'm not just going to bore you with a bunch of talking. I'm going to try and interact. Which schedule do you guys think leads to the longest rate of behavior? If you had to guess.
Say intermittent.
Yes, and do you know which specific one, maybe?
I'd say variable intermittent.
Yes, so variable ratio leads to the highest rate of behavior long term because it's unpredictable. So the animal, in my instance, will keep doing the behavior, thinking it'll increase their chance of being rewarded. Whereas the other forms, it leads to satiation. Sorry, guys, can't speak. So variable ratio is the best to use if you want behavior to last in the long term. And now this one is the most used in the zoological world. It falls under operant conditioning, but it's shaping and it's used to start a new behavior. So if you've ever been to an aquarium and you see a sea lion show, obviously there's nothing innate about those behaviors. So to do the tricks that the sea lions do, there was a shaping plan beforehand. So what you do with shaping is you make a list of steps to get to your target behavior, and those are called successive approximations. So before that, you'll identify your starting behavior. And let me go back one slide. I have an example. So if you see here, this is a target pull. I don't know if you see the little red and white thing, that's a target pull. Also very commonly used in the zoological world. Let's say your target behavior is the animal looking at it. And then you begin to reinforce that so the animal starts to associate looking at the target pole with being rewarded, so that will increase. And then you make a bunch more steps to your target behavior. Let's say this was Summer. In this instance, we wanted her to bite the target pole. So when she started biting it is when we started reinforcing her. But an example of a successive approximation that came before that was if she bit or just opened her mouth somewhere near the target pole, that was rewarded until we eventually got her to just bite the actual target pole. So you have your successive approximations as well. And then before you start your training, there's also a couple of other aspects you should identify. And I will talk more about those later, but there's stuff called, you definitely want to pick your type of reinforcement. So if you see this is an anteater, I trained her to walk with a harness with a keeper nearby. So for her, the reinforcement was worms. And then you want to pick your schedule. So I actually did fixed interval. After 3 minutes or so of walking alongside me with a harness, I gave her a handful of worms. And then you want to pick a verbal cue and a bridge, or a visual cue as well. And a cue is what the animal hears to know to start doing that behavior. So for her, I would say harness, and she would like come near it and know to start walking with me. And the bridge is an animal hears that and know a reward is coming. So the bridge was good. Whenever I said good, she got her little worms. And now this one is also widely used in the zoological world. It's differential reinforcement. And in plain old psychology, there's a couple of more forms, but these two that I've put here were the most used in my experience with animals. So differential reinforcement is selectively reinforcing a desired behavior in place of an undesired one. And then there's differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. So that's when you pick a target behavior that physically cannot happen at the same time as the problem behavior, which I will give an example. I will give examples of both of these actually. And then there's other behavior where you reinforce a desired behavior in place of, oh, excuse me, I'm thinking of a different type that's not even listed. This is when the problem behavior doesn't occur at all during a specified time interval, and you reinforce that. So again, I have this picture here because this bird was an example. This is Oda. She was a wattled curassow, and she had a baby and was a little too protective of the baby and was making it kind of unsafe for keepers to go in with her. She would bite, she would strike, she would attack. So we used both differential reinforcement of incompatible and other behavior. So what I started doing with Oda was when I would come into her exhibit, I trained her to, when I said here and I pointed to a spot, let's say the branch was here, she would here to the position. And while she was flying to a position, she couldn't be biting and attacking keepers. So that was reinforced. And the replacement behavior of here increased a lot more than the behavior of immediately attacking a keeper once they entered. And then differential reinforcement of other behavior, I would sit on a rock in the exhibit with Oda, and as long as she was well behaved around me, no striking, no biting, I would give her food. And that would be after just a few minutes of her being well behaved. And these are just some terms and other concepts to know if you're interested in doing anything with animal care, being a zookeeper, or working with any sort of animal rescue as well. I mentioned this before, a bridge. It's usually a verbal cue to the animal that their behavior is completed, they did it successfully, and they're getting a reward. Because sometimes you'll see them start to question, like, where's my treat? Where's my treat? Did I do it good? So they know. And then there's a cue. And that is something to prompt the behavior. So I would say harness, and the anteater would come to the harness. I would say here, and the bird, I have her here again, Oda, would know to come here and fly over to another branch. There's also target, that pole I showed a few slides back. When I hold this and I say target, they know, most of my animals know to touch it with their nose. Another really large thing, especially anything with animal care, rescue care, is desensitization. In the wild, obviously animals don't know like what a target pole is, what a clicker is, what a crate is. And a lot of animals need to be created for, especially if you're working in rescue, like they have to be created to be transported to a care facility. Animals in zoos get checkups, they have to be created to be taken to the hospital on site. So it's important to desensitize them to objects that they're going to need to be around before just throwing it in their face. So what I would do with my animals is leave the crate in their exhibit, and I would put enrichment or food in there so that they learn to associate the crate with something positive, and they also learn not to fear the crate. And then when the time came that they had to be transported, there was no hassle of getting them into the crate to go to the hospital, which also, I've seen some animals who weren't desensitized. It causes a lot of stress. So it's helpful for the animal, and it's also really helpful for the keeper. And then this one is really important, an ethogram. If this is very niche to working in a zoo, zoos will have you make an ethogram. It's just a list of species-specific behaviors that you'll have pre-listed out to observe and analyze of a specific animal. And a really important thing to gain experience in if you want to work with animals is learning to read an animal's behavior, whether it's for stress, discomfort, illness as well. And that's going to be personal to different animals. So like I know with this anteater, I trained her to walk outside on the harness, and I had to learn to realize when, okay, we've had enough time outside, she would start to pace, she would start looking for her mom. You could see she wasn't interested in her worms, which was odd for an anteater. So stuff like that, but that wouldn't really happen with a bird. Usually when Oda was in discomfort or stressed is when she would start pecking at people. So you really need to learn to read your animal. And sometimes if you work with a specific animal and then you go to another facility and work with the same species, those indicators of stress and discomfort will overlap, but sometimes they won't. So it's very variable, but it's also very important to get used to. And that's really all I have. If you guys have any questions about specifics of the working in a zoo or working with animals, do absolutely let me know. Or if you want any more instances, information on any of this, absolutely feel free to ask.
I actually have a question. You mentioned conservation work, correct?
Yes.
In the beginning. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm a really big Disney fan, and I just have to ask.
Oh my God, it's okay, me too.
Have you ever considered working with Disney's conservation program in Animal Kingdom?
Yes. So the thing with Disney is they're really hard to work for. Everybody wants to work for Disney. It's very competitive. You have to have a decent amount of years of experience. And I know people who have applied many times to a specific role and still haven't gotten it. So yeah, I look at their job postings often, but you kind of have to be prepared to be let down a few times.
Have you tried doing it through the Disney College program?
I thought about that, but it didn't work out for me.
Okay.
I live in Tampa right now. I'm from Staten Island, and I had a lot of priorities that I had to deal with back home in Staten Island, so I couldn't really do the college program. But it's a great program, and Disney's Animal Kingdom, it's associated with the American Association Zoos and Aquariums, so they have really high standards of care. It's a really great facility. So if you're interested in interning with them, being a vet tech for them, anything, I highly recommend it.
What's your plans after graduation?
So right now, I'm actually applying for both jobs and internships in zookeeping. I really enjoyed the work. And then maybe after that, I'll get a master's in zoology, marine biology, something like that. I definitely love working with animal behavior. And if you are interested in working in some sort of zoological facility or working with animals, it's really, really important to have a decent amount of experience on your resume. So I got this through volunteer work. I started volunteering when I was 16, and then I did a few internships. I continued volunteering. So thankfully, all of that on my resume, plus some internships, I'm going to continue it.
That's awesome.
Anybody want people examples? No, I'm kidding.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you guys for having me.
Well,
I hope you enjoyed it at least. I hope you
Definitely,
learned
yeah.
something because this stuff can actually be applied to everyday life.
For sure.
Everybody's got a brain. Psychology, especially behavior, it applies to everything.
Thank
Thank you so much.